In October of 2023, I was able to come home after my rock climbing accident for the first time. I had been staying with my parents who were taking care of me, and I surprised my kids and came home in October, a little bit earlier than they had expected me. Um, it was a weird time because I was on the main floor during the day and, kind of got around. I could get around in the kitchen and stuff like that. But then at night, my husband and son would carry me upstairs and carry my wheelchair up there, and then I'd kind of hang out up there in my wheelchair. So I was kind of like at their mercy, stuck on one floor or the other. So one night I woke up in the middle of the night and I was starving, and I hadn't thought to bring any food up there just in case. After that, you can believe I had a stash in my closet, but I had no food. Now, usually my kids are quite bad about breaking the rule of having food in their rooms. So I thought, oh, surely they've snuck some food into their rooms, even though they're not supposed to. So I went and I kind of wheeled into their rooms, had to like kick things out of the way and kind of clear a path because their rooms weren't super wheelchair accessible with all the mess. Anyway, so I made it to the closet, scavenged around a little bit. Nothing. Of all the times for them to start keeping the rules, nobody had any of the 3 bedrooms upstairs had no food in them. So what do I do? I'm so hungry. I didn't want to wake anybody up because it's the middle of the night. So I remembered that a friend had brought me a care package and it was in my room, wrapped in cellophane. So I didn't want to be too loud. So I brought it into my closet. I wheeled it on into my closet, shut the door, and started opening this cellophane. And inside was a candy bar. I unwrapped it and I stuffed it into my mouth. I felt like kind of a wild-eyed ravenous beast, just gorging myself on this chocolate. I was so hungry. Anyway, I kind of realized that if they made a movie about my last year and a half in very literal survival mode, that might be what they put on the movie poster, is me inside this closet with chocolate all over myself, wild-eyed, trying to eat this. I don't think I actually had chocolate all over my face, but you get the picture. Welcome to the Family Lab podcast. I'm your host, Whitney Archibald. In the past, on the How She Moms podcast, I would make quarterly updates on what was going on, what experiments we were trying in the Archibald home. So I want to keep that up here on the Family Lab podcast. But it's been a while, so I'm going to catch up on kind of the last year and a half of our experiments that we've been trying. And the reason it's been so long is because of my rock climbing accident. If you haven't heard this story, I fell 30 feet in a rock climbing accident in July 2023. And you can hear the whole story about that accident a few episodes back. It's called How She Falls Off a Cliff. But today will be kind of part 2 of that episode to fill you in on my year and a half of recovery. I'll kind of tell my story as I go through some of the experiments that we tried in our house as I have been in this kind of prolonged state of survival. And if you watch the podcast on YouTube, you'll see occasional videos and pictures to illustrate some of the things along the way. If you want to watch it that way, that's a new thing with this new podcast. So first, a few thoughts on surviving. This is obviously not the first time I've been in survival mode. It's just the most prolonged time I've been in survival mode. I've had babies, I've been sick, I've had sick kids. Even when you go on a trip, you're kind of in survival mode when you get home for a little while. There are lots of reasons for being in survival mode. So I'm sure you've been there too. Normal routines go out the door. You can barely get food on the table or out of the grocery bags. When you're in survival mode, survival itself is kind of a grand day-by-day experiment. You're trying to just make things work. You're going to plan B, plan C. But it also kind of forces you into a bird's eye view of your life. What is the minimum that we need to survive? What can we do to make it through to the end of the day, the week, the month? What mess can we live with and what mess can we not live with? What do we need to address? My friend Jessica Jackson has a great framework for thinking about survival mode. And I had her on the podcast on episode 117 of the How She Moms podcast called How Jessica Goes from Surviving to Thriving. So totally check that out. It changed the way I think about survival mode. mostly because it helped me understand the cycle of surviving and thriving. So she breaks it down into 5 stages. So first there's survival mode, where circumstances are bigger than you, like sick kids, pregnancy, all those things that I mentioned before. Grief, breaking all your bones in your body like I did, any of those things. The second stage is re-entry, and that's when you have to catch up on all the things that you let go of in survival mode. The third step is normalizing, putting some basic systems into place. The fourth is exploring, discovering what brings meaning and joy into your life. And fifth is thriving. And you know what that means, the amazing feeling of like, yeah, we're doing great right now. These steps aren't linear. Like I said, they're a cycle. And you don't always make it to the thriving part before you cycle back to survival. Sometimes it's just like you get to number 2 and then you cycle back to surviving. We all know survival is not a one and done kind of thing. I kind of feel like I've been spiraling upward through the first 3 stages of survival. Kind of getting to a new normal and then having another setback. And anyway, just kind of still overall improving, but kind of cycling through those stages for the last year. But I just think it's a really helpful way to think of it so that you can kind of figure out, okay, like I'm going through these different stages. This is where I am right now. This is where I want to be. Anyway, it's just really helpful. I would highly suggest going back to look at that interview. Jessica is a genius. So as I've been kind of going through these cycles of survival, I've been almost forced to try a lot of experiments that I never thought we would be experimenting with. So I thought I would share some of these experiments and what we've learned. And hopefully you never have to go through similar circumstances to learn from these experiments. So the first set of experiments we tried after my accident was some hardcore outsourcing, as you can imagine. While I was still in the hospital, my husband David, my parents-in-law, and sisters took turns taking care of me in the hospital. They helped me brush my teeth and my hair, wash my hair, fetched me things, entertained me, all the things. They helped me so much in the hospital. So that was a lot of outsourcing. I couldn't do anything for myself. And also during that time, they were taking care of my kids, between David, my parents, my sisters. And then eventually they came back to Colorado and my in-laws were helping take care of them here. Eventually I came home from the hospital and my parents were feeding me, taking care of me, helping me get around. My mother and father-in-law were here in Colorado, getting my kids ready for school every morning, taking them to school, tidying up. Then my friend Molly would drive the kids home from school and my in-laws would come back, make dinner, clean up. They did all the grocery shopping. They made sure things were running smoothly, made sure they did their homework. And then David would come home and take care of everything else. We hired another friend to clean 6 hours a week. She kept the house stocked with supplies, toilet paper, etc. A bunch of my friends took my kids to and from practices and took care of all the details of their sports. Countless other people helped in other ways. They brought meals. Everyone really stepped up to take care of my family. So a million thanks to everybody who helped. At that point, the only thing I wasn't outsourcing was reading bedtime stories to my kids, which I did over Zoom. And then there were some other little things I could do on the computer, like I managed the calendar still and fielded the emails and paid bills and stuff like that. But I was very limited in what I could do, and I had to outsource most of my life. I hope you never have to experiment with outsourcing pretty much everything, but it was actually kind of amazing to see that it could be done, partly because I had a great support system and it couldn't have happened indefinitely, but it was interesting to see what happened when I had to rely on people for basically everything. And it was interesting to watch other people basically run my life. Interesting for me and for my kids. Like sometimes it gave us new ideas for doing things. For example, I even got some good ideas for how to rearrange my kitchen when other people were putting things away where they thought they should go. And I was like, oh, that makes more sense than where I had them. But also other things, just like the routines and things. It gave us a new perspective and has changed some of the ways we've done stuff. It also made my kids grateful for how I do things, what they were used to, things that they might have taken for granted. So that was kind of a cool little thing. Plus, my in-laws are very tidy, so it gave my kids a chance to see what it's like to live in a really tidy house for a while. Maybe they'll, uh, catch the vision at some point and help me keep it a little better too. It's not necessarily one of my strengths. Anyway, then in mid-October, I came home to Colorado and we started a new version of survival mode. My in-laws and friends still helped with meals for at least the first month I was home, thank goodness. My husband and the kids stepped up and kept the kitchen clean, which honestly was not super hard when all the food was being brought in and not prepared in there. But yeah, it was a good transition period for us being more self-sufficient again. And they all helped me get around with the wheelchair, pushing me on walks, carrying me up the stairs to bed, fetching things for me. And we all kind of improvised. I came up with a system of being able to drive the kids to school. So I was in a wheelchair and there were steps down there and I had to be able to get back in by myself. So I would get out of my wheelchair in the house and then kind of scoot on the ground and go down scoot down the steps. And then I had an office chair in the garage, and I would get myself into the wheelchair and then get myself into the car and then drive them to school and then do that all in reverse on the way back. So I had to get pretty creative. I figured out how to do that. But it felt so good to be able to do something for myself that I had been outsourcing. In fact, I cried the first time I pulled away from driving them to school because I was so happy to be able to do such a normal thing like drive them to school. A few weeks later, I was able to bear weight on my legs again because my pelvis was healing, and I got to get out of the wheelchair and started physical therapy, all those things. I had a little setback because I had to have kidney stone surgery just to, add that in there. But anyway, it took me a while to finally get my feet under me again, very literally. But once we did, we could kind of start the next phase of experiments, and that was simplifying. So once I could do more things for myself, we just had to live in a more simple way than we had before. And that was kind of around Christmas time by the time I got done with my surgery. And so we just really had a simple Christmas in 2023. I could do most of the shopping from home, of course, but we simplified the decorations with just some wreaths and a Christmas tree. The kids did all the decorating. We just left all the other decorations in the bin. And you know what? Christmas still felt like Christmas, and it was much easier to put away afterwards. And, we usually during Christmas fill our time going to concerts and having families over for music nights or games, but this just wasn't the year for that. So we didn't do any of the Christmas service projects as a family. We didn't go visit the giving machines or, any of those other festivities, but we did stay cozy and watched a lot of movies together. And my kids kind of stepped up and wrapped all the presents. And it was kind of fun for them to be more involved in the process. They knew more of what everybody else was getting, but it was kind of a fun, sweet time. So overall, that experiment of an extra simple Christmas went really great. It showed us what really mattered, which is spending time together. And it was kind of fun to have that more cozy time at home. Plus, it was really easy to take down our minimal decorations after Christmas. Then when Valentine's Day came around, I had really good intentions. I bought all these treats to put on their pillows leading up to the big day, and I planned to do my usual tradition of writing notes about what I love about my husband and my kids and sticking them on their mirrors. But just with everything going on, I never got around to the notes, and we ended up just eating the treats on a movie night instead. And guess what? We still had Valentine's Day, and it was still a nice day, and everyone still felt plenty of love. One of my favorite Valentine's traditions, since it falls close to President's Day and a 4-day weekend, is that I always take my kids on individual dates, and I surprise them with a different fun activity we can do together. I thought I could do that again, but it was just too hard for me physically to go out every day. And so I just decided to still do it, but space it over a longer period of time. And that worked too. So, we just kind of modified and simplified our traditions. The next place we simplified was just food in general. And so I just kind of made a list of really simple meals that we could rotate through. Not necessarily the most healthy or wonderful food, but things like chicken nuggets and spaghetti, taquitos, breakfast tacos, brats and beans. Crock pot meals were great. We did a lot of repeats, but it was just what I could handle during that time, and what the kids could help me do. So, and what the kids had time to help me with. So by now we've added a lot more meals into the rotation, but I'm still cooking a lot simpler than I used to. We're still not quite out of survival mode. At this point, it's kind of physically impossible for me to both do dishes and make dinner. I can kind of be in the kitchen for about 30 minutes and then I need to lie down and rest my back. So that's kind of where we are right now. And so we still outsource meals more than we used to, going somewhere to eat or ordering in. And that's just kind of the part of the facts of life when you're in survival mode. We also pared down on extracurricular activities. The fall still kind of got a little crazy this fall when one was in a play and one was doing mountain biking, and two were running. But in the spring especially, we just didn't do any of those extracurricular activities. And it was fantastic. We had a lot more time together. They played a lot more music at home. It was great. So that was another fun experiment. It almost felt like kind of COVID times again, where you just kind of cut things out and simplify. So that was nice too. So the next set of experiments is kind of related to this idea of simplifying, but it's a little more nuanced than that. And that's a term I got from Greg McKeown. I read his book, Essentialism, several years ago. And then actually right before my accident, I had the chance to interview him which I also host for Brigham Young University. So yeah, I could link to that episode also. It was fantastic. But McKeown's definition of essentialism is doing less but better. So basically his approach is more than minimalism and simplification. It's kind of starting at the ground level and figuring out what's really important to you, your values, your deep interests, meaningful connections, and then designing your life around those and spending your time actually doing the things that matter most to you. It is a really great book. I recommend it if you haven't read it. But that had me thinking about what things are most essential in my life. And then the accident kind of made me think about it even more, and made the essentials very clear. So I was basically able to start with a clean slate, start with nothing, and then gradually add things back in and choose carefully what I wanted to add back in. So first, I just wanted to be with my people, my family and friends, especially that first month after the accident. I was enveloped by my family and friends. They were visiting me in the hospital and at my parents' house. I almost felt like Tom Sawyer when he got to attend his own funeral while he was still alive up in the rafters, because people came from far and wide to celebrate that I was still alive, and they were saying the nicest things, and it was just so warm and fuzzy, and it was beautiful. And the people who couldn't visit were sending cards and gifts, and I just felt so surrounded and so loved. But it made me realize just how important all these people are to me, and that's really all that mattered. I could still be with these people. It was really just an incredible experience. Then I was able to add back in some of the activities that I loved. And surprisingly, one of the first was podcasting, not because I had to. My editor at BYU said that I could take all the time I needed. Obviously, he's a very nice guy, but I really wanted to, even in the hospital. So when I first opened my computer in the hospital to figure out what episode was coming up next and just get my bearings, luckily I'd worked ahead. So, we were in pretty good shape. When I opened that computer, I felt so much like me again. Like, it felt like I could do this. This is one normal activity that I could still do. And I'm very blessed that I can still work, when I'm lying in bed, even a hospital bed. I even did one interview from my hospital bed, which seems crazy to me now, but I kept the podcast going, releasing episodes twice a month. And that was a really great thing. And I realized that is an essential part of my life. I love the creativity and I love the practice of podcasting. So I did have to step away, as you may know, from the How She Moms podcast. And I just continued with the Y Magazine podcast until just now. But just doing that was really, it really fed my soul. So I realized that's a part of my life that is important to me, that is essential to me. Then I started to be able to sit up again, and I could take short wheelchair excursions outside. And I realized that another of my essentials is time outside. Eventually, I could take longer wheelchair rides, and then I was able to walk again. So I tried to get out and walk every day that I could. The weather was good enough, and then I combined that with the first thing that was essential to me, friends. And I would invite different friends to walk with me, partly for safety, because I didn't want to fall, and I wasn't super stable at first, and then it just became a really cool thing to be able to spend time walking with my friends. I kind of went through, since I'd been gone so long, I kind of went through a list of all the people that I wanted to catch up with, and I'd invite them on a walk, and it was just another really beautiful time. Another essential thing for me is reading, and I could still do that. At first, I couldn't even hold up a book because my back was in so much pain even when lying down. So we rigged up a Kindle that could go on this little arm, and I could read with that. And then eventually I could read with a real book again. And anyway, it just made me realize what an important part of my life reading is. So brought that back in my life, but also I could read to my kids over Zoom, and that was a lovely thing. It was a great way to connect when we were apart. And so, yeah, that was an essential part of my life, is reading and talking about ideas with people. So that process of figuring out what was essential ties into another really important thing I realized about being in survival mode. So I think part of what makes survival mode so difficult is the identity piece. And I hadn't really realized that until this time of prolonged survival, because I realized, when you can't do anything, you kind of lose perspective of who you really are. That exercise in essentialism was helpful for me, but I realized that a big part of my identity is being productive. I can do that. I can figure that out. I can help you with that. I liked being the go-to person that people would call when they needed help. Suddenly I was the one calling people for help, and I was not productive. And it kind of was jarring to my self-worth. I'm not getting anything done. I know that's not what we should base our self-worth on, but it was hard, and it affected my identity. And so one of the experiments I tried for that is that I was resting a lot, so I could podcast for some of that, but I couldn't podcast all the time, especially when my kids were home. I didn't want to be distracted that way. I didn't want to just be on my phone all the time when I was resting and my kid and husband are home. So I took up crocheting, and it was also good for physical therapy for my hand, which is still pretty permanently gimpy from the break in my wrist. So anyway, so I started it kind of more as physical therapy, and then I realized how it was helping this identity piece of helping me be productive when I was resting. And so that has become a beautiful part of my life now, and it filled another part of my identity, being able to be creative. I had that with the podcast, but it kind of opened up an artistic side that had kind of been dormant since maybe even high school. And now I love just thinking of new ideas and creating things. If you're on the video, you can see scrolling through some pictures of some of the things I've made. I've had a lot of fun making pillows for my couch and a blanket or two blankets so far. I'm working on another big blanket and this kind of crazy project idea that I got. But I love just thinking up things in my head and then being able to create them. So that's been awesome. And I realized it's actually really great because I can still be engaged in conversation, but I'm busy with my hands. I feel productive. It's been just a great thing. So I may be a little obsessed with it. My husband and I joke that one day he's going to wake up and just be wrapped in a crocheted cocoon when he wakes up in the morning, because I will have crocheted him into that overnight. But hasn't happened yet. So stay posted. But anyway, if you care to see if you care to keep up on my crocheting life, I decided to start a separate Instagram account so that I didn't keep putting it on the Family Lab account. So I called it How She Crochets. So if you care, you can follow that and see kind of my day-to-day progress on my crochet projects. The next kind of theme here is flexibility and creativity, which may be two of the most important skills when you're in survival mode. The art of the pivot. So you have to be flexible when you don't have the bandwidth to follow through with your original plan for the day. You have to be creative to think of plan B, C, or D. And of course, you have to prep your kids for the fact that they have to be flexible, that no plans are set in stone, from what's for dinner to outings to typical bedtime routines, all those things. There just has to be a lot of grace and flexibility. So one example, my husband, David, and I have always had this plan to take all of our kids on a senior trip the summer before their senior year. So for our oldest son, Jonas, we had been planning and prepping and buying all the gear so that we could go on this epic hike in Italy, Switzerland, and France, the Tour de Mont Blanc. So that trip was scheduled for the week after my accident, so it did not happen, needless to say. But we got an airline credit for it. And then we found out that we had to use it by January 1st. And I knew I wasn't going to be ready for an international trip by then. So David and Jonas decided to switch gears, literally, and they planned a cycling trip to Mallorca, Spain, starting the afternoon of Christmas Day. So I was all for that. Like, I still wanted him to get a senior trip. It made me so happy that he could still do that. And so they planned a whole new adventure, trained for this epic bike ride. They rode 170 miles, had the time of their lives. It was great. It turned out maybe even better for that son. He's so into cycling, and this was, something that they wouldn't have been able to do in the same way with me. Anyway, it was just a beautiful trip. But that left me and the rest of the kids, and I was still pretty limited in my physical abilities. I was a little bit nervous about taking care of them alone for 10 days. And so, again, we made another plan B, and I booked them a flight to Utah. So they went and they hung out with cousins and my parents, and I didn't feel even really up for the travel. I stayed here. Sometimes you just have to think outside of the box when you're in survival mode and figure out a new way to do things. So that was a great experiment. Everybody was happy. I was able to relax and did a lot of healing, and without a lot of responsibility for the other kids. It was great. The next category is reclaiming our routines. And so for a while, the kids were just happy to have me back, and they helped out a lot. They were fetching me things, helping me in and out of my wheelchair, up the stairs like we talked about. They cooked simple meals from that list. They brought their dishes to the dishwasher. They did their kitchen chores. They were awesome. They were excited to have me back and kind of showing off and helping and being awesome. But they are human, and young humans at that, and the bloom wears off. And honestly, I didn't really want them to have to stay in that caregiving mode for too long anyway, because they're still kids. So then we had an old-fashioned paradox on our hands. I needed their help more than ever, but I didn't have the bandwidth to manage them and get that help after, the newness kind of wore off. And I realized that our old systems were not working because it requires a lot of work to get kids to work. And I did not have the bandwidth for that. If you want your kids to get chores done before they play with friends or on screens, you have to be able to remind them, inspect the work after they claim it's done, make sure one of them isn't sneaking off to play or do their screens, just all the things. If you want to hold consequences and standards, it takes a lot of work. Before the accident, our systems were working pretty well, but after the accident, I realized that was mostly because I was working really hard, and that was great when it's possible, but I could not keep up that kind of level of management, and it got pretty chaotic. David did what he could, but he works long hours. He wasn't home a lot, and it's really a two-person job keeping up on that. So we had to kind of think of some new ways to manage chores. So it was really funny. When I first got home, my kids announced to me, like, hey, we don't have to go back to our old system. we figured it out. Like, we really did a good job of keeping things clean. We just cleared our own dishes, and we all just helped out and cleaned the kitchen till it was done. So I just let them try that for a while, and it was not working. They somehow were not getting those things done like they said they were so capable of doing. So I started asking them some questions. I was like, so while I was gone, who was taking out the trash? Who was emptying the dishwasher? Who was sweeping? Who was cleaning up after breakfast after you guys went to school? And they kind of thought for a minute, and they're like, oh yeah, it was grandma and grandpa. So they kind of realized that the reason it was working so well was that somebody else was doing all those things, which was a good thing for them to realize, that it wasn't just magic, and that, but that was obviously not sustainable because we didn't have two people that were focusing on that. Even if the kids were being helpful, it wasn't enough to get the job done. So now it was time to start cleaning up on our own again and figuring out that skill. I still wasn't able to help. David was helping, but we really needed everybody to start pitching in again like they used to before the accident. So first I kind of took them up on it and said, okay, everybody works together till it's done, like you've been doing, right? And that's kind of the dream. Like, you picture that, like everybody's listening to music, dancing, cleaning up together. We have found that in reality, that doesn't work out so well. Some kids start working after dinner right away, but some disappeared suddenly. And the ones that stayed got mad at the ones that left. There was lots of fighting. Some all of a sudden had really essential homework to do. They couldn't possibly help. It just got really contentious, and it wasn't working out. Nobody was really responsible for any one area. So they just kind of, even when they were cleaning, they just kind of piddle around and not get it all done. So it was not working out. So it didn't take us long to realize that system that they wanted to try wasn't going to work. So the next experiment I wanted to try was doing timed work. So I thought this would work. I just said, everybody just owes me 15 minutes in the kitchen a day, no matter what time it is. So it can work in your schedule, just 15 minutes a day. I thought this was genius because everyone would work the same amount of time. They wouldn't all be in there at the same time, so there would be less fighting. The kids who worked first would get a natural reward. So there was like incentive to go first because then you got the easier jobs. You could get those done. So I thought, that'll help them want to get in there and get it done. And then, the ones who procrastinated would have to scrub the dishes at the end because that's what would be left. It seemed like the genius solution. Also, I thought it would help them develop the talent of seeing what needed to be done and doing it. So I just thought I'd come up with the greatest plan. And theoretically, I actually still love that idea. I think it could solve a lot of the problems. But again, it just wasn't really working. They were just kind of not putting in a lot of work for those 15 minutes and just kind of moving things from place to place, never really cleaning it up. It kind of looked the same at the beginning and the end of their 15 minutes because they weren't focused on one specific area. Third experiment after that failed was going back to our regular job rotations where every kid has something that they're responsible for. There's one that does the dishwasher, one that does the table, one that does the island, one that does the counter, one that sweeps and takes out the garbage. And then they just rotate each month. And I would do the dishes. And so for a while, David took that over, or the kids would all take a few of the dishes that were left over after they cleared and washed their own dishes. So that's our regular system. And so we went back to this and it was better. It was still a struggle before I was able to actually help. And that's when I realized that the reason that system works and the other chores that I have them do worked is that I had a system where there were consequences. So if they didn't do their job by the end of the day and I had to do them in the morning, then I would keep track of my time and I would charge them an hourly rate for me to do their chores. So they had this incentive to get their work done or else I would do it and charge them. And when I couldn't do chores, when I couldn't finish those jobs, they just weren't getting done and there was no consequences. And so really the kitchen jobs didn't really work until now when I can do their work for them. Sometimes not till the next morning because I'm pretty exhausted at night, but anyway, I realized what was really making our system function. It wasn't the organization of their assignments. It was really that I had a way to enforce it with the money. And so that's still what works best for us. We've gone back to that. So that's where we stand today. So there's an apocryphal story that circulates every now and again about this stay-at-home mom who whose husband asked her, well, what do you do all day? And so she decided to stay in bed for the day and not do what she does all day. And he came home and the kids are swinging from the rafters and the house is a disaster and everything is chaos. And although I don't love that story because it's there's a lot of stereotypes in there, like the mom that does everything and the doofus husband. I don't think those are great stereotypes to perpetuate. I did find myself actually relating to that story more as the doofus husband in that story, because I was able to see what happened when I wasn't doing all the things that I used to do. And it really made me appreciate all the things I do on a daily basis, or that I did and I'm building up to doing again. And I realized this one day while I was just staring into the fridge, and it was a disaster. There was old food, moldy in Tupperware. It was totally disorganized and I didn't know what was in it. It was just chaos. And I was like, wow, I used to like go through the fridge every week when I went grocery shopping and clean out the old food. And I was so on top of it and I knew everything that was in there. And just that little piece made me realize all the little things that I never realized I was doing a good job about. I've never been very proud of my housekeeping skills. I'm not like, that's not my forte, I would say. But not being able to do any of it made me realize how much I have been doing and how much better I was than I actually thought I was. And so that's kind of been a little nice bonus about this period of survival mode. I've gained an appreciation for what I used to do, and I've been able to appreciate it when I've been able to do those things again and reclaim some of those things. I'm not as critical as myself with when I fall short in housekeeping, because I'm improving each day and being able to take on more and more activities. When I think about how I used to juggle the housework, manage the kids, spend quality time with them, keep our schedules together, volunteer at the school and the church, and still bring the fun, it's amazing what I was able to do. And it's amazing what I can do now with my limitations. You're amazing. What you're doing is amazing. And really, if you didn't do your job for a day, things would fall apart. Like, you are holding it together. Even if you're in survival mode, you are making things happen and you are there for your kids. You are doing the essential things. And hopefully this makes you take stock and reevaluate your essentials, to think about what you're doing and what you want to be doing. Maybe be able to say no to some things, take some things off your plate, simplify. So I guess that's my last experiment challenge for you, is to sit down and write down what is essential to you, and maybe identify one thing that you might be able to simplify, and maybe one thing that you can outsource. Just take some of these categories and evaluate how you can apply them in your own life.
Thank you so much for listening and watching the podcast. It really means a lot to me. If you liked today's episode, I have lots of experiment episodes going back. I just checked all the way to 2019. That one was called Routine Experimentation, but the rest are called How Whitney Experiments, and then they give the date and the time of year. So there are lots of those to go back and choose from, in different stages of my life now, all the things we've been trying. So check those out and tune in next week for an episode called The Top 5 Kid Podcasts. It's a lot of fun and you'll get great recommendations for podcasts to listen to with your kids. Special thanks to my lovely intern, Bailey Blake, for all her help with the video and audio editing of this podcast, plus various other things. She's awesome. And thanks to my mother for playing the theme music. She used to play this all the time when I was growing up, and to me, it sounds like the soundtrack of motherhood.